The color is called Lee 181, Congo Blue, and I want to say that first, before anything else, because if you skip to the end looking for the name of it, you will find it there too, and I would rather you have it now and decide what you want to do with the rest of what I'm telling you. It's a deep, saturated blue gel, almost violet at the edges, the kind of color that eats most of the visible spectrum and leaves only a narrow window of light behind. Designers use it for moonlight, for dream sequences, for the moment in a ballet when the stage is supposed to feel like it isn't quite the stage anymore. I've used it for 15 years. I have a stack of them in my road case, cut to fit half a dozen common fixture sizes, and I have never, until this past December, had any reason to think of Congo Blue as anything other than a colour. I'm going to tell you what happened at the Halverson Centre for the Performing Arts during the 11-show run of the Brindle Valley Ballet's Nutcracker, between the load-in on the 1st of December and the strike on the 28th. I'm going to tell you in the order I noticed things, because the order matters. If I tell you the end first, you won't believe the middle. If I tell you the middle first, you won't sit through the beginning. And the beginning is where the answer is, if there is an answer, which I am not sure there is. My name doesn't matter. I'm a freelance lighting designer. I work mostly regionally, dance companies, small operas, the occasional industrial, and I take the Nutcracker gigs because they pay for January and February, which is when nobody in this business works. I have done 17 Nutcracker productions in my career. I can light the snow scene in my sleep. I have lit it in my sleep more than once, in the literal sense woken up at 4 a.m, with the cue sheet drifting through my head, the fade times already written. That's the background. Now the story. The Halverson is a 740-seat house in a town I'll call Aldermere, in a part of the country where the winters come early, and the theatres were built in the 1920s out of brick and ambition. It has a proscenium opening of 38 feet, a fly system with 22 line sets, and a lighting grid that was last fully overhauled in 2008. The booth is at the back of the orchestra, behind a glass window that fogs in the cold months because the HVAC was designed for an audience of 800, and there are usually 400. The board is a 48 fader console with a touchscreen overlay that was state-of-the-art when my apartment had a landline. I knew the building. I had lit 2 productions there before a Madama Butterfly in 2019 and a contemporary dance showcase in 2022. And I knew the quirks. The house left FOH position has a dead circuit you have to bypass. The third electric pipe hangs low, and you can't put a Source 4 PAR on it without losing trim. The basement, under the orchestra pit, smells like damp plaster no matter what time of year it is. None of this is unusual. Old theatres have personalities, and you learn them and you work around them. The artistic director of Brindle Valley Ballet is a woman named Petra Voss, 61, formerly a corps dancer with a company in Munich. She inherited the Nutcracker from her predecessor and has been refining it for 19 seasons. Her version is unfussy, clean lines, traditional choreography, no attempt to make Tchaikovsky into a statement piece. She hires the same designers every year because she doesn't like surprises. I had done her production once before in 2021, and she had asked me back this season because the designer she usually used had moved to Atlanta. The plot was simple. 2 acts, 22 cues per act, plus preset and bows. The snow scene at the end of Act 1 uses a wash of cool blue with a gobo breakup to suggest snowfall, which I rigged with 2 Source 4 19 degrees on the second electric, gelled with Lee 181, projecting a snowflake template through a slow rotator. The land of sweets in Act 2 is warmer, ambers and pinks with a single deep blue special for the Dewdrop Fairies entrance. Also Lee 181, this time in a 26-degree fixture hung house right on the first electric. 3 fixtures, 3 gels. I cut them myself on the first day of load-in, from a fresh roll I'd bought at a supply house in the city before I drove up. I remember cutting them because the X-Acto blade was dull, and I had to lean on it harder than usual, and I nicked the pad of my left thumb, and there's a small pale scar there now that I can see when I type. This is the kind of detail I'm including because it matters to me that you understand I am a person who pays attention. I have to pay attention. It is what I'm hired for. When I tell you that Lee 181 was in 3 fixtures and only 3 fixtures, I am telling you something I know with the certainty of someone who cut the gels herself and tied the gel frames into the fixtures with my own hands. Load-in took 4 days. We teched on the 5th and 6th. The dress rehearsal was on the 7th. Opening night was the 8th of December, a Friday, and the run went through the 23rd with shows every Thursday through Sunday and matinees on weekends. 11 performances total. I was contracted to be present at all of them, sitting in the booth running the board, because Petra didn't trust house operators with her cues, and I didn't blame her. The first 6 performances were unremarkable. I want to be very clear about that. There was no flicker, no anomaly, no creeping sense of wrongness. The show ran. The dancers danced. The snow scene at the end of Act 1 landed beautifully. Every night the audience always gasped when the gobo breakup started rotating and the snowflakes drifted across the CIC, and Petra came up to the booth after the 3rd performance to tell me it was the best snow she'd ever had. I wrote that down in my show book, because I write everything down. I have the entry. December 10th, after the Sunday matinee. Petra says best snow ever. Asked if I could bring the CIC up 2 more points at Q47. Said yes. The 7th performance was the Wednesday matinee on the 20th. School groups, about 600 kids in the house plus chaperones. Nothing unusual about a kid show. They're louder than evening audiences, they laugh in different places. But the cues are the same. It happened in Act 1, Q47, the snow scene transition. The cue is a 4-second crossfade from the warm interior of the Stahlbaum living room to the cool exterior of the snowy forest. The Source 419S on the 2nd electric come up to full. The warm front light goes out. The gobo rotators start spinning, and the corps de ballet 12 dancers in white tutus. The snowflakes enters from the wings stage left and stage right in a staggered pattern. I ran the cue. I watched the stage. The blue came up. The gobos started rotating. The snowflakes entered. And then for about 2 seconds there were only 8 of them. I want to describe this carefully because the way I'm describing it is not the way it felt in the moment. In the moment, what I noticed was that the spacing on stage looked wrong. The snowflakes are choreographed to enter in a specific staggered formation that creates a visual rhythm, 3 from stage left, 3 from stage right, then 3 more from each side, 6 and 6, 12 total. What I saw was 3 and 3 and 2 and 2. 8 dancers. The formation was lopsided. There were gaps where bodies should have been. I assumed I had miscounted. It was the matinee, my eyes were tired. The booth window had fogged at the bottom edge, and I'd been wiping it with my sleeve. 2 seconds later there were 12. I don't mean 4 more dancers ran on stage. I mean that the next time I looked, the formation was complete, the spacing was correct, and the snow scene proceeded exactly as choreographed. If you had walked into the theatre at any point after those 2 seconds, you would have seen a perfect, traditional snow scene, and you would have had no reason to think anything was wrong. I sat in the booth for the rest of the act with my hands on the console, and I told myself I had miscounted. At intermission, I went down to the house and found the stage manager, a woman named Reese, and asked her in the most casual voice I could manage whether anything had felt off in the snow scene. Reese is in her 40s, has been calling shows for 20 years, and possesses the kind of unflappable effect that good stage managers cultivate, the way surgeons cultivate steady hands. She looked at me over her reading glasses and said the snow had gone fine. The core had been a little tight on the second entrance, but otherwise clean. She asked if I'd seen a problem. I said no. I said I thought a cue had been slow, but I'd watched the recording later. I do not, in fact, record my cues. I said it because I wanted her to stop looking at me. She nodded and went back to her clipboard. I walked out to the lobby, stood near the concession line and watched the audience. 600 kids, mostly between the ages of 7 and 12, on a field trip from a regional school district. They were eating cookies and pulling at each other's coats, and the chaperones were counting heads and herding them back toward the doors for Act 2. Nothing about any of them suggested that they had seen anything unusual. I went back to the booth. I ran Act 2. The Dewdrop Fairy's entrance, lit by the single Lee 181 special on the first electric, came and went without incident. She danced her variation. The Sugar Plum did her grand pas. The curtain came down, the audience clapped, and the kids filed out. I packed up the booth and drove back to the motel, and lay on the bed with my shoes still on, and tried to construct an explanation. The explanations available to me were these. 1. I had miscounted, which was the simplest and the one I was most professionally embarrassed to consider, because I've been doing this for 15 years and I do not miscount 12 dancers. 2. 4 dancers had been late on their entrance and I had not been able to see them in the wings, which was possible but would have been visible to the audience and to Reese, who had told me the snow had gone fine. 3. Something about the lighting had made 4 dancers invisible for 2 seconds. I dismissed option 3 immediately. It was not a real option. I included it only because I am the kind of person who considers all options before discarding them. I fell asleep at some point and dreamed about the gel pack in my road case, the stack of Lee 181 squares neatly cut and stored between sheets of waxed paper. And in the dream I picked one up and held it to the motel lamp, and looked through it and saw that the room on the other side of the gel had no bed in it. The next performance was the Wednesday evening show. Adult audience, smaller, about 340 in the house. I ran the show with the kind of attention I used to bring to opening nights when I was first starting, when every cue felt like a decision I might get wrong. Cue 47 came, the snow scene transition. The blue came up. I counted the dancers as they entered, one by one, in real time, and there were 12. I exhaled. I made a note in my book. Counted. 12. Fine. The Dewdrop Fairy entered in Act 2. I watched her variation. She was alone on stage for 90 seconds, lit by the deep blue special and a single follow spot, and she danced through it cleanly. I counted her. There was one of her. There was supposed to be one of hers. The math worked. I drove back to the motel and slept without dreaming, or without remembering whether I dreamed, which is the same thing for practical purposes. The Thursday show was unremarkable. The Friday show was unremarkable. The Saturday matinee on the 23rd was the second to last show of the run, and it was during this performance that I began to understand that something was wrong with the gel, and not with me. Cue 47. The snow scene transition. The blue came up. The gobos started rotating. The core entered. There were 11. I counted twice. I counted a third time, watching the stage with the kind of focus I usually reserve for a complicated cue sequence. 11. The formation was off. There was a gap stage right. Third position from the upstage edge, where a snowflake should have been, and where there was instead a small empty rectangle of stage floor with the gobo breakup rotating slowly across it. The snow scene runs for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. For 3 minutes and 40 seconds of that time, there were 11 dancers on stage. In the last 32 seconds, when the core exits in 2 diagonal lines, 12 dancers exit. I watched them go. I counted them as they left the stage. 12. After the curtain came down for intermission, I unclipped my headset and walked down to the wings. I do not normally leave the booth during a show. I had a 15-minute intermission, and I used 11 of them to find the dance captain, a young woman named Adira, and ask her again casually, again pretending it was about something else, whether anyone had been off in the snow. Adira said no. She said the snow had been clean. She said one of the snowflakes, she named him Marisol, had felt like she'd lost her timing in the middle section but had recovered. She asked me if I'd seen something. I said no. I said I was just checking. I said the spacing had looked tight from the booth, and I wanted to make sure no one had collided. Adira nodded and went back to the dancers. I walked back to the booth through the house. The audience was milling in the aisles. A grandmother was helping a small girl with a juice box. A man in a tuxedo was checking his phone. The world looked exactly as it had looked before I had counted 11 dancers where there should have been 12, and I understood, walking up the center aisle in the dim house lights, that no one else in the building had seen what I had seen. This is, I think, the moment when something in me stopped trying to find a normal explanation. I want to mark it for you, because if you've read this far, you should know where the turn is. It was on the Saturday matinee of the 23rd of December, walking up the centre aisle of the Halverson Centre, with intermission music playing through the house speakers, that I accepted as a working hypothesis that the gel was doing something. I ran Act 2. The Dewdrop Fairy entered. She was lit by Lee 181. I watched her for the full 90 seconds of her variation, and at one point, I cannot tell you exactly when, because I lost track of the cue stack briefly and had to scramble to catch up. At one point she was not on the stage. The follow spot was there, the blue special was lit. The music was playing her variation, but the stage in the pool of light was empty. Then she was there again. She finished the variation. She bowed. The audience applauded. I called the next cue. I called the next cue after that. I made it through the show. I sat in the booth for 30 minutes after the audience had left and the cleaners had started sweeping the aisles. I stared at the cue sheet. I stared at the patch list. I stared at the gel cuts, which I had taped to the inside of my show book, the way I always do, so I could reference the colour numbers without flipping through the rolls. Lee 181, 3 fixtures. The 2 source 4s on the second electric for the snow scene, and the 26 degree on the first electric for the Dewdrop special. In the moments where I had seen fewer dancers than there should have been, the dancers in question had been the ones lit by Lee 181. The snow scene snowflakes were lit by the blue wash from the second electric. The Dewdrop Fairy was lit by the first electric special. When dancers had been missing, they had been missing only when standing inside the cone of Congo blue light. I wrote this down in my show book. I wrote it down because writing things down is how I think, and I needed to think. I wrote, L181, only L181, dancers absent only in beam. Then I sat for another 20 minutes looking at the sentence. There was one show left, the closing matinee on the 24th, Christmas Eve, at 2 in the afternoon. After that, strike. After the strike, I would pack my road case and drive home and never have to think about the Halverson Centre for the Performing Arts again. I could pull the gels, I could swap the Lee 181 for something close, Lee 174 maybe, or Roscoe 80, and the colours would shift slightly, but the audience would not notice, and Petra would not notice because Petra was watching the dancers, not the spectrum. I could do this in the 45 minutes between my arrival at the theatre the next morning and the half-hour call. I could also leave the gels in. I could run the show as designed. I could find out whether what I had seen was something I had seen. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that I made a choice. The choice was not made for me. There was no rule system imposed on me. No instruction left by a predecessor, no institution coercing me. I had a road case full of replacement gels in the basement of the theatre, and an X-Acto knife in the front pocket of it, and 45 minutes the next morning during which I could have made the problem go away. I did not pull the gels. I want to tell you this because I am a careful person, and I needed to verify what I had seen before I changed the design of a production I was contracted to deliver as designed. I want to tell you it was professional integrity, but I think the truth is that I wanted to look at the blue one more time, knowing what I knew, and see if it would do the thing again. I drove back to the motel. I ate a sandwich from the gas station next door. I lay on the bed and I read through every entry in my show book, going back to load-in, looking for anything I had noticed and dismissed. There was one entry, December 4th, the second day of focus, when I was up on the ladder aiming the second electric. I had written L181 in 2E, reading hot at centre. Possible bad batch. A hot gel lets more light through than the spec sheet says it should. It happens. Gels are manufactured in batches, and occasionally a roll comes out a quarter stop, brighter or dimmer than the rest of the production run. It's the kind of thing a careful designer notes and moves on from because there's nothing to be done about it unless the variation is dramatic enough to matter. I had noted it and moved on. I read the entry 3 times, reading hot at centre. I had meant the centre of the beam, the gel was passing more light through its centre than its edges, which is unusual but not unprecedented. Gels degrade unevenly, especially under high output sources, and a fresh gel sometimes settles into its final transmission profile after the first few hours of use. But I had cut these gels from a fresh roll on the first day of load-in. They had not had time to settle. I went to sleep with the show book open on my chest and the bedside lamp on. I dreamed about the second electric. I dreamed I was on the ladder, focusing the fixtures, and when I looked through the lens of the Source 419 at the patch of CIC it was supposed to be hitting, the CIC wasn't there. There was just a square of darkness, the exact shape and size of the beam, and inside the darkness I could hear someone breathing. I woke up at 5 in the morning and could not get back to sleep, so I drove to the theatre at 6, 3 hours before my call. The Halverson has a stage door on the alley side. I let myself in with the code Reese had given me, and I walked through the cold, dark backstage in my coat, with my breath visible in front of me, because the heat in the building cycles down overnight and doesn't come back up until 8. The stage was set for the top of Act 1, the Stahlbaum living room, the Christmas tree, the painted backdrop of the parlour. The work lights were on, 2 bare bulbs hanging from the grid, throwing the stage into a flat grey illumination that made everything look like a photograph of itself. I climbed the ladder to the second electric. The Sorkforcer 19S were where I had left them. The Lee 181 gel frames were seated in the front of the fixtures, the deep blue squares of colour catching the work light and throwing small blue rectangles onto the stage below. I pulled one of the gel frames out. The gel inside it was Lee 181. I held it up to the work light and looked through it. Through the gel, the stage was empty. I want to describe this precisely. Through a Lee 181 gel, looking at a normal stage under work lights, what you should see is a stage that is tinted deep blue. The work lights should be visible, dimmer, and bluer than they actually are. The set should be visible in monochrome blue. The floor, the curtain legs, the tree, the painted backdrop, all of it should be there, in blue. What I saw when I held the gel up to my eye and looked through it at the stage was a deep blue field with no objects in it. The work lights were there, 2 faint blue circles where the bulbs were, but the stage itself was not visible. There was no floor, there was no tree, there was no painted backdrop. There was a blue void with 2 distant pinpricks of light in it, and the pinpricks were the work lights, and there was nothing else. I lowered the gel, and the stage was there again. I raised the gel, and the stage was gone. I did this 6 times. Then I climbed down the ladder very carefully, because my hands were shaking, and I went into the house and sat in the 3rd row, and held the gel up to the work lights one more time, looking at the empty house, and the seats were not there either. Through the gel, the house was a blue cavity with 2 distant lights in it, and somewhere in the cavity, I had the immediate and unshakable sense that something was looking back at me. I lowered the gel. The house was empty. The seats were there. I was sitting in one of them. Everything was as it should have been. I sat in the 3rd row for a long time. I would like to say that I went up to the second electric and pulled all 3 gels and replaced them with Lee 174 and ran the closing matinee with a slightly different colour temperature and had a story I never told anyone. That would have been the rational thing to do. It would have been the safe thing. It would also have left me, for the rest of my life, with the question of what I had actually seen and whether I had imagined the dancers disappearing, and whether the gel had ever done anything at all. I decided to run the show as designed and watch the cue from the house. This was not a rational decision. I want to be clear about that. The rational decision was to pull the gels. I made a different decision. I made the decision a person makes when they have spent 15 years building a career on noticing things that other people don't notice, and they have finally noticed something that no one else can see, and they want, before they let it go, to see it one more time and know that they saw it. I called Petra at 7 in the morning from the lobby payphone, which is the kind of detail you don't expect a theatre built in 2024 to still have, but the Halverson does. And I told her I was feeling unwell, and I had hired a house operator to run the closing matinee, which was a lie because the house operator I named a man called Devin, who had run cues for me in 2022, did not work at the Halverson anymore and had moved to Portland. I told her I would be in the house watching the show to make sure the cues looked right, but I wouldn't be in the booth. Petra was annoyed, but she did not push back. She had a closing matinee to run and a cast party to organise, and a designer with the flu was a problem she could solve by trusting the cue stack and Reese. I went to the booth. I programmed the entire cue stack to run on a follow the leader sequence, which is something the board can do each cue automatically executing on a time delay from the previous one, so that the show could run without an operator as long as nothing went wrong. This is not how you should run a show. This is the kind of shortcut that a designer takes when there's no other option. I did it because I needed to be in the house. I sat in row L, seat 14, house left aisle, with my show book in my lap. The audience filed in. 643 people, mostly families, mostly dressed up, mostly there for the last Saturday matinee of the holiday season. The orchestra tuned, the house lights dimmed, the overture began. I watched Act 1 the way I've never watched a Nutcracker in my life. I watched every dancer, every entrance, every cue. I counted bodies. I counted them aloud, under my breath, with my finger moving across the page of my show book to keep track. Cue 47 came, the snow scene transition, the lights shifted, the blue came up. I counted the snowflakes as they entered. 6, 6. Where there should have been 12, I want to tell you what it looked like. The stage was lit in deep blue, with the gobo breakup rotating slowly, creating the illusion of falling snow. 6 dancers were on the stage, in white tutus, executing the choreography. They moved in the formations they had rehearsed, hitting their marks, lifting their arms, doing the small fluttering footwork that the snow demands. They were beautiful. They were dancing correctly. But the formations are written for 12. The choreography has 12 specific paths, 12 specific positions, 12 specific lifts. With 6 dancers, the stage looked half empty. There were huge gaps where bodies should have been. The visible dancers were dancing as if the other 6 were there, with them, leaving space for them, looking at them, catching imaginary hands at the lift points. I looked around the house. The audience was watching the snow scene with the expressions audiences always have during the snow scene. Children leaning forward, adults smiling. A woman 2 rows in front of me was wiping her eyes. They were watching 12 dancers. I could tell by the way they were watching, by the way their heads moved to track the core across the stage, by the small involuntary reactions to lifts and turns that were happening in positions where, from where I sat, there was no one. I looked back at the stage. 6 dancers. The choreography was being executed by 6 bodies, but the audience was responding to 12. I want to be clear that I am not saying the audience was hallucinating. I'm saying that from the house, from row L, seat 14, where I was sitting without looking through a Lee 181 gel, I could only see 6. The audience sitting in the same house, with the same eyes, was seeing 12. The gel was on the fixtures between the lamps and the stage. The light hitting the dancers had passed through the gel. The light hitting the audience's eyes had not. The snow scene ended. The dancers, 6 visible, 12 choreographed, exited. The curtain came down for intermission. I sat in my seat for the 15-minute intermission and did not move. The audience around me got up, went to the lobby, bought drinks and came back. A woman climbed over me to get to her seat and apologized, and I did not respond. Act 2 began. I want to tell you that I left. I want to tell you that I got up at intermission, walked out of the theatre, got in my car and drove home. I did not. I stayed. The Dewdrop Fairy entered. She is lit by Lee 181 in the 26-degree special on the first electric, plus a follow spot. The follow spot uses no gel. It is white light, full spectrum. From row L I watched the cue. The follow spot tracked across the stage to her starting position. The blue special hit her. She began her variation. In the white light of the follow spot, she was a woman in a green tutu, dancing. In the blue of the Lee 181 special, she was not there. I want to describe what I mean. The follow spot was a circle of white light moving across the stage. Inside that circle, when it overlapped with the blue special, I could see her as the follow spot illuminated her a partial figure, the parts of her caught by the white light, her arms and her face and her tutu. The blue special surrounding the follow spot was a wider pool of empty blue light hitting the stage floor. Where the blue light fell on her body, her legs, her back, the parts of her not in the white spot, she was not visible. There was just blue light hitting the floor with a partial woman, sliced into pieces by the edge of the follow spot beam, dancing in the middle of it. The audience saw the dewdrop fairy. I know they did. They applauded at the right moments. They gasped at the right moments. A child behind me said, "Mum, she's pretty." And her mother said, "Yes, she is." And I sat in the dark with my hands on the armrests and watched a woman in a tutu be selectively erased by deep blue light, while 642 other people watched her dance. The show ended. The curtain call came. The dancers came out for bows. Under the standard wash of the bow queue, which uses a mix of warm and cool front light, but no Lee 181. All 12 snowflakes were on stage. All of the company was on stage. The dewdrop fairy was on stage in her full corporeal presence, and they bowed and they smiled and they accepted flowers from children, and the audience stood and applauded for a long time, and I sat in row L and applauded too because I did not know what else to do. After the audience left, I went backstage. I went up to the second electric and I pulled the 3 Lee 181 gels, the 2 from the Source 419s and the 1 from the 26 degree special on the first electric, and I put them in my jacket pocket. I did not replace them with anything. The strike was happening tomorrow, and the fixtures would come down, and the gels would be discarded with the rest of the show's consumables. I went down to the basement, to my road case, and I took the stack of remaining Lee 181 gel cuts, the ones I had cut on the first day of load-in, but never used, kept in reserve in case a frame got damaged, and I put them in my jacket pocket too. I did not throw them away. I do not know why I did not throw them away. There was a dumpster in the loading dock. I walked past it on the way out of the building. I had the gels in my pocket and I walked past the dumpster and I got in my car and I drove back to the motel. The gels are in my apartment now. They are in a manila envelope on the top shelf of the closet in my home office, behind a stack of old show books. I have not looked at them since the night of December 24th, when I put them in the envelope, sealed it, and wrote nothing on the outside. I did the strike on Christmas morning. There was no one else in the building except the loading crew. I struck the lighting plot the way I always do, uncircuit the fixtures, lower the pipes, pack the gels into the recycling bin for the venue to deal with. I left the road case in the basement to be picked up by my truck on the 27th. I drove home that afternoon, 5 hours, mostly empty highways, grey sky, the heater on too high. I stopped twice for gas and once for coffee. I made it home before dark. For the first 3 days I did not think about it. I cleaned my apartment, which I had not done in 2 weeks. I called my sister, who lives in another time zone, and we talked about a movie she had seen. I ordered groceries. I watched the snow fall outside my window in the small light of the street lamp across the alley. On the 4th day, I started thinking about it. I started specifically by trying to figure out what a deep blue gel could do that would cause 6 dancers to be absent from the stage while the audience saw 12. I am an educated person. I know how light works. I know that a coloured gel is a filter. It removes wavelengths from the light passing through it, leaving only a narrow band. Lee 181 transmits primarily in the deep blue and far violet ranges, with very small amounts of red and green leaking through. There is nothing in any wavelength of light that can erase a body. But the dancers had not been erased. The audience had seen them. I had not. The difference between me and the audience was that I had been holding the gel up to my eye in the morning, looking at an empty theatre, and I had seen the seats vanish. The audience had been looking at light that had passed through the gel and bounced off the dancers and travelled to their eyes. I had been looking eventually at the same thing the dancers lit by the blue and seeing fewer of them than the audience was seeing. The simplest explanation, the one I have come to and cannot move past, is that Lee 181, or this batch of Lee 181, or these specific cut squares of Lee 181, does not filter light. It filters something else. Maybe it filters perception. Maybe it filters bodies. Maybe what I was seeing through the gel was the real stage, and what the audience was seeing under the light was a stage with something added to it. Maybe what I was seeing without the gel on the closing matinee was a stage with something taken away. I have written all of these sentences down. I have read them back. They do not make sense as physics. They do not make sense in biology. They do not make sense as optics. But they make sense as a description of what happened, and the description is the only thing I have, because I am not a physicist, or a biologist, or an optical engineer. I am a person who points lights at dancers. I want to consider one more thing. The dancers who were missing on the matinee, the 6 snowflakes, the partial dewdrop fairy, were dancing the choreography correctly. They were responding to the music and to each other. The dewdrop fairy was executing her variation. They were not gone in any sense that the dancers themselves would have noticed. Adira told me Marisol felt off in the snow, but recovered. The dewdrop fairy took her bows, accepted her flowers, and went to the cast party. None of the dancers, as far as I know, experienced anything unusual during any of the performances. What I am saying is that whatever the gel did, it did not do it to them. It did it to me. The audience saw 12 dancers because there were 12 dancers. I saw 6 because something about the way I was looking through the gel, or having looked through the gel, or having become a person who had looked through the gel was subtracting. This is the explanation that frightens me the most, because it means the gel is in my apartment, and I am the person who has looked through it, and I do not know yet what else I am going to fail to see. I want to tell you about January. January was the month I usually take off. I had no shows booked. I had savings from the Nutcracker run and a small commercial gig coming up in late February. I had time, and I had nothing to do with it. And I had a manila envelope on the top shelf of my closet. I did not open the envelope. I want to make that clear. I have not, in fact, opened the envelope since I sealed it on December 24th. The gels are inside it. I have not looked through one since the morning of the closing matinee. But in January, I started to notice things. The first thing I noticed was in my kitchen. I was making coffee. The kitchen has a window that faces east, and in the mornings the light comes in low and direct. I was standing at the counter with my back to the window, pouring water into the coffee maker, and I felt the light on the back of my neck, the way you feel the sun in the summer, warm and present. And then, for a second, just a second, I had the very specific sensation that the warmth on the back of my neck was coming from inside my apartment, not from the window, as if there were a light source behind me in the kitchen that should not have been there. I turned around. The window was there, The light was coming through it. There was nothing else. I went on with my morning. The second thing I noticed was at the grocery store. I was in the produce section, picking out apples. The overhead lights at this grocery store are LED bright, cool, with a slight blue cast that I have always found unflattering but unremarkable. I picked up an apple and held it up to inspect it, the way you do, and as I turned it in my ha, and I saw in the curve of its skin a reflection. The reflection was of the overhead lights, 2 rectangular fluorescent panels, ceiling mounted, 15 feet up. They were there in the apple's skin, small and curved by the surface, and between them, in the reflection, there was a third light I could not see when I looked up. I looked up. There were 2 panels. I looked at the apple. There were 3 reflections. I put the apple back. I left without buying anything. The third thing I noticed was last week, on Tuesday morning, when I was sitting at my desk working on the plot for the February commercial. I had the overhead light on, the desk lamp, and the laptop screen. I was looking at a draft of the plot, a simple plot. 12 fixtures, a corporate event in a hotel ballroom. No Lee 181. Nothing exotic. And I noticed that my hands on the keyboard looked wrong. They looked specifically slightly transparent. Not invisible. Not gone. Just slightly less present than they should have been. As if a small amount of the light hitting them was passing through them instead of bouncing off. I held my hands up to my face. They looked normal. I put them back on the keyboard and looked down. They looked slightly transparent again. I turned off the overhead light. They looked normal. I turned the overhead light back on. They looked slightly transparent. The overhead light in my office is a standard warm white LED, 2700 Kelvin, with no blue cast at all. There is no Lee 181 in my apartment. The gels are in an envelope on the top shelf of the closet. I have not opened the envelope, but I am the person who looked through the gel, and whatever the gel did to my hair, it did not stay at the theatre. It came home with me, in the way the dancers came home with the audience, in the way the audience went on with their lives carrying the memory of a snow scene with 12 perfect snowflakes that I now know contained 6 women dancing alone in the spaces between themselves. I want to tell you what I think, finally, although I want to be clear that thinking, it does not make it true. I think Lee 181 is just a colour. I think the rolls of it sitting in supply houses all over the country, in the road cases of every lighting designer who works regional theatre, are just blue gel, doing what blue gel does. I think the Lee 181 I cut from a fresh roll on the first day of load-in at the Halverson Centre was just blue gel when I cut it. I think it became something else somewhere between the second day of focus, when I noted it was reading hot at centre, and the 7th performance, when the snowflakes were 8 for 2 seconds. I do not know what made it become something else. I do not know whether it was the building or the fixtures or the specific configuration of the plot, or the proximity to a particular kind of music played at a particular volume in a 740-seat house for an audience of children. I do not know whether any of those things had anything to do with it. I know only that the gel did something, and that I looked through it, and that having looked through it, I am now a person who sees less than other people see, in light that should be unremarkable, in rooms that contain no Lee 181 at all. I do not think this is going to get worse. I want to say that. I have been telling myself for a month that whatever the gel installed in my vision is small and bounded and will fade with time, the way a flash blindness fades, the way a retinal afterimage fades. I have been telling myself that in another month I will look at my hands on the keyboard and they will be fully present, and the apples will reflect only the lights that are there, and the warmth on the back of my neck in the morning will come only from the window. I do not know if any of this is true. I have no evidence either way. I have the gels in a manila envelope in my closet, and I have decided that I am not going to throw them away, because if I throw them away, I will spend the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I had looked through one more time and seen the rest of what was missing. And I have decided that I am not going to open the envelope, because if I open it, I will look through it, and I will see whatever else there is to see, and I do not think I will be able to put the gel down afterward. So the gels are in the closet, and I am at my desk, and the February commercial is in 3 weeks. I have to be careful when I program the plot not to call any blue gel I do not absolutely need. I'm going to use straw, amber, and open white. I'm going to keep the lights warm. I'm going to point them at corporate executives in a hotel ballroom, and the corporate executives are going to give speeches, and afterward I'm going to go home and not look through anything that filters light. There is one more thing. Yesterday I got an email from Petra. She is planning next year's Nutcracker. She is asking if I am available for the run. The dates are the 1st through the 28th of December, the same as this year. The plot is the same, the cues are the same. She would like, she said, the same snow she had this year because it was the best snow she'd ever had. I have not replied. I've spent the last 24 hours composing replies in my head. Yes, I would love to do the show. No, I am committed to another production. Yes, but I would like to revisit the color choices. No, the version of me that exists in this apartment, in this chair, with the manila envelope on the top shelf of the closet behind me, knows that the answer is no. The version of me that has spent 15 years saying yes to Nutcracker gigs in December because they pay, for January and February, does not know how to type the word. I have been sitting with it. I have been thinking about the snowflakes. I have been thinking about the 6 who were there, and the 6 who were not, and the way the audience saw 12, and the way Petra came up to the booth after the 3rd performance and told me it was the best snow she'd ever had. I have been thinking about the fact that Petra said best snow, not best snowflakes. She said it about the look of the scene, the wash, the gobos, the falling snow effect. She was talking about the lighting. She was telling me that this year's snow scene, with my plot, and my gel, and my fixtures, looked better than any snow she had seen in 19 years of running this production. I have been thinking about whether the reason it looked better was that I had finally cut the gels from a roll that was doing something, and the something it was doing was making the snow scene look the way the snow scene is supposed to look: full, busy, complete, by adding bodies to the stage that were not there. Bodies the audience could see that danced the choreography for the missing snowflakes, that the missing snowflakes were dancing alongside without knowing. I have been thinking about whether the 6 snowflakes who were not on the stage on the closing matinee were not on the stage because the gel had been used too many times by then. 11 shows. And whatever it was adding had started to subtract instead. Whether each performance had cost the gel something, and by the 11th show, it had nothing left to give, and the audience had gotten the full 12 only because the gel was supplying them and not me. I have been thinking about what would happen in the 2nd year of using this gel if I cut new squares from the same roll, whether the roll is still doing it, whatever it is, whether the 2nd year audience would see 12 dancers from the 1st show, and whether I would see fewer, and how much fewer, and whether by the closing matinee of the 2nd year I would see anyone at all on the stage. I think I am not going to do the show. I think I'm going to write Petra back and tell her I am not available. I think I am going to recommend a designer I know in Atlanta, the one she used before me, who moved away, and I think I am going to let it go. But I do not know yet, and I am telling you this not because I have decided, but because I have not. The email is open in another tab. The cursor is blinking. The manila envelope is on the top shelf of the closet. I keep thinking about how it looked. I keep thinking about the snow scene from row L on the closing matinee 6 dancers in deep blue light, dancing through the gaps where the other 6 should have been, hitting their marks for absent partners. It was, in some way I cannot get past, the most beautiful thing I have ever lit. The gel was doing something the gel is not supposed to do, and I was the only person in a room of 643 people who could see what it was doing. And what it was doing was so strange and so quiet and so precise that I am having trouble, a month later, calling it horror. I know it is horror. I am telling you it is horror because I want you to know I have not lost the ability to recognize it. The dancers were not really there. The audience was watching something the audience could not have been watching. My hands on the keyboard are slightly transparent in normal light. None of this is good. None of this is something I want. But it was beautiful. It was the most beautiful snow I have ever lit. And I was the only one who saw what made it beautiful. And the email is open in another tab. I think I am going to close the laptop now and walk away from the desk. I think I am going to go to the kitchen and pour myself a glass of water and stand at the counter with my back to the east window and feel the morning light on my neck and try to be sure, completely sure, that the warmth is coming from outside the apartment and not from somewhere behind me. I think I am going to do that, and then I am going to come back to the desk, and I am going to write Petra and tell her no. I think that. But the envelope is in the closet and the email is open in the other tab, and I am, in the privacy of my own apartment with no one watching, a person who looked through the gel on purpose, twice on the morning of the closing matinee, on a ladder above an empty stage, in a building old enough to have its own quiet, and saw what was on the other side, and then climbed down and ran the show. I do not know yet what I am going to write to Petra. I will let you know.